I'll never forget the night my Uber driver whispered, "Act natural," and drove past my house. At first, I thought he was joking, but then he pointed toward my bedroom window, and I saw someone standing there, watching us. The problem is, I live alone. Hey everyone, my name's Ava. You're about to hear the most terrifying night of my life. Make sure to subscribe if you love true personal stories, and comment below where you're watching from. It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind where everything feels peaceful. I had just finished dinner with my mom, Diane. She always insists on feeding me when I visit, saying, "You never eat enough when you're alone." I'd laugh and roll my eyes, but truth is, she's been worried ever since I moved out on my own. I had only lived in my new house for a few weeks. It was small but cozy, surrounded by trees, the kind of neighborhood where you could hear crickets at night. I liked the silence. After a rough breakup, it felt like a fresh start, a place where I could finally breathe again. My Uber driver that night was Marcus. He looked to be in his 40s, calm eyes, kind smile, the type of person who makes you feel safe without trying. We talked easily during the ride. He told me about his daughter starting college, and I told him I worked from home as a graphic designer. "Quiet job, huh?" he said with a laugh. "Yeah," I smiled. "Just me and my laptop most days." The rain started falling halfway through the ride. It made the world outside blur, streetlights melting into puddles, everything soft and calm. I remember thinking how good it would feel to curl up on the couch with a blanket when I got home. As we turned into my neighborhood, I pulled out my phone. A text from my mom popped up. "Home safe yet?" I smiled and started typing. Almost. Then, as my house came into view, Marcus slowed down. I thought he was just looking for the right driveway, but he didn't stop. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on something ahead. His voice dropped to a whisper so low it felt like it barely existed. "Don't react. Act natural." My fingers froze over my phone. The soft rhythm of the rain suddenly felt too loud. My heart began to pound so hard it drowned out every other sound. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to laugh, trying to understand what was happening. He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked toward my house. Then he pressed the gas and kept driving, right past my driveway. "Hey, that was my turn," I said, my voice shaking. Marcus didn't look at me. He just said, steady and low, "Someone standing at your window." I turned my head slowly, watching my home disappear in the side mirror. For a moment, I thought he must be mistaken, but then I saw it. A figure, still, shadowed, standing at my bedroom window, facing the street. Every bit of warmth drained out of me. My mouth went dry. I whispered, "That's impossible. I live alone." Marcus glanced at me, serious and calm, the kind of calm that makes you even more afraid. "You sure no one else has a key?" I couldn't answer. My mind was spinning, replaying every night I'd come home, every creak I'd heard, every time I'd brushed off the feeling of being watched. The car was silent except for the rain hitting the roof. I could barely breathe as we drove farther away from my home, away from whoever, or whatever, was standing in my window. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound of the rain on the roof mixed with the rhythm of my pulse, until I couldn't tell the difference. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter than before. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating. I finally managed to whisper, "Are you sure you saw someone?" My voice cracked halfway through the question. Marcus nodded once, still staring ahead. "I saw a man, tall, standing completely still by your bedroom window." The words hit me like a punch. My window faced the backyard. Nobody could stand there unless they came through the fence or were already inside the property. I tried to breathe, but it came out shallow and shaky. I pressed my phone tightly in my hand, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I didn't even know what to say. What if Marcus was wrong? What if it was a trick of the light? But deep down, I knew he wasn't. The tone in his voice had been too serious, too real. He pulled into a gas station a few blocks away and parked under a bright security light. The rain splashed against the windshield as the wipers moved back and forth in slow, steady sweeps. Marcus turned to me for the first time since he'd whispered those words. His face looked calm, but his eyes showed something else: concern. "You're not going back there alone," he said. I nodded automatically, not trusting myself to speak. He took out his phone and said he was calling the police. I listened as he explained to the dispatcher what he had seen and gave them my address. When he hung up, he looked at me again. "They're on their way," he said. "They'll meet us back at your place. We're going to stay here until they call." His voice was steady and reassuring, but my hands were shaking. I texted my mom right away. "Something's wrong. Stay by your phone." It took less than a minute for her to call. The second I heard her voice, everything I had been holding back came rushing out. "Mom, someone's in my house," I said, trying to stay calm but failing. She gasped and started asking questions, her voice trembling. I told her about the Uber driver, the figure in the window, the police on their way. "Honey, don't you dare go back there until they arrive," she said firmly. Even through the phone, I could feel her fear. It made mine grow stronger. I ended the call and sat there in silence again. The clock on the dashboard seemed to move slower than normal. My mind ran wild with every possible scenario. Maybe it was a burglar who thought the house was empty. Maybe it was someone from the neighborhood. Or maybe it was worse. Every shadow, every sound outside the car made me flinch. Marcus kept glancing at me in the mirror, checking if I was okay. "You said you just moved in, right?" he asked after a few minutes. I nodded. "Anyone else know you live there?" "Just my mom and a few friends," I said. Then I remembered something. The previous owner had left a spare key hidden behind the outdoor meter box. I'd been meaning to move it, but forgot. A chill spread through me as I realized how easy it would have been for someone to find it. "There's a key outside," I said quietly. Marcus frowned. "Then we're not waiting long. The police will handle it, but we need to stay somewhere safe until they clear the place." Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. The police were outside my house and ready for us to meet them. He turned the car around, driving slowly this time, headlights cutting through the rain. Every turn of the wheels made my chest tighten. My house came into view again, quiet, still, the windows dark except for the porch light I'd left on. From a distance, it looked completely normal. 2 police cars were parked out front, their lights flashing red and blue across the wet pavement. The officers waved us over. Marcus parked on the side of the street, and I stepped out of the car with trembling legs. The air smelled like rain and pine, sharp and cold. One officer approached, a tall man with a calm face. "You're the homeowner?" he asked. I nodded and gave him my name. He said they'd do a full sweep before letting me in. I watched as they moved through my front door with flashlights, their silhouettes shifting through the windows. Minutes passed, but it felt like an hour. I stood beside Marcus, arms crossed tightly, eyes fixed on the house. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but I could still hear every drop hitting the roof. I thought about all the nights I'd slept in that bedroom, completely unaware someone might have been nearby. My stomach twisted at the thought. Finally, one of the officers returned and told us to stay put while they checked the back. I nodded, but my body was rigid, every muscle tense. The front door creaked open again, and I saw one of the flashlights sweep across my living room. Then another officer's voice called out something I couldn't make out. The first officer looked back at us, eyes narrowing slightly, and walked inside again. That moment, standing outside my own house with the rain dripping down my hair and my heart thundering in my chest, I realized how quickly safety can disappear. One moment, you think you're home. The next, you're not even sure if it's yours anymore. I looked at Marcus, and he just said softly, "Whatever happens, you did the right thing." His calm voice helped me hold it together. I watched the front door, waiting for the officers to come out again, waiting to know if the person he'd seen was real. Every second stretched longer, and all I could do was hope that when they came back, they'd tell me I was safe. But deep inside, I already knew something wasn't right. The flashing lights from the police cars painted my street in streaks of red and blue, reflecting off the wet pavement like broken glass. I stood near the curb, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, shivering, not from the cold, but from the fear sitting deep in my chest. Marcus stayed close by, silent but steady, his presence the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I could hear the officers inside my house moving around, their radios crackling every few seconds. The sound was both comforting and terrifying. It meant someone was in control, but it also meant they hadn't finished searching. One of the officers finally came out, a woman with sharp eyes and rain dripping from her hat brim. "Miss Reynolds," she said, "we've checked the first floor. Nothing so far. We're moving upstairs now. Please, stay here." Her tone was calm, professional, but it didn't make my heart beat any slower. I nodded and forced a small "thank you," my voice barely audible. As she turned back toward the house, Marcus looked at me. "You holding up?" he asked quietly. I nodded again, though my body said otherwise. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. "I keep thinking I imagined it," I whispered, "that maybe no one was there." Marcus shook his head. "No, I saw him. He was real." The certainty in his voice gave me chills. I didn't know if it made me feel better or worse. I stared at my house. The same front porch I'd decorated with a hanging fern, the same window I'd cleaned that morning, and it suddenly looked unfamiliar. It was like looking at a stranger's home. A few minutes later, the officer returned and motioned for us to come closer. "We didn't find anyone inside, but we'd like you to confirm if anything looks out of place." I followed her up the path, my legs weak, Marcus close behind me. The air smelled like damp earth and rain-soaked wood. When she opened the front door, I hesitated before stepping inside. The familiar scent of my candles mixed with something else, something faintly metallic and wrong. The living room looked normal. My books were still stacked on the coffee table, the blanket still folded on the couch. But as we moved deeper into the house, a tension grew inside me. We reached the hallway that led to my bedroom, and the officer turned her flashlight on the floor. A small trail of wet footprints led from the front door toward the back of the house. "They weren't mine. Those weren't here earlier," I said, my voice shaking. The officer nodded. "Stay behind me." We followed the prints to the back door. It was slightly open, rain blowing in through the gap. The lock was twisted, bent from the inside. My chest tightened as the officer pushed it shut and examined it. "Looks like someone forced it," she said. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Whoever it was had been inside, maybe even watching me leave earlier that night. Marcus reached out and touched my shoulder gently. "You're safe now," he said, but I could tell he didn't fully believe it. The officer spoke into her radio, calling for another patrol to check the area behind the house. Then she looked at me. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight?" "My mom's," I said instantly. "She lives about 20 minutes away." "Good," she replied. "I'd recommend you don't stay here until we've done a full sweep. We'll send a team to dust for prints and check for any signs of entry elsewhere." I nodded, still in shock. The thought of being in that house one more minute made my skin crawl. I walked toward my bedroom to grab my purse, and when I opened the door, I froze. The window was slightly open, curtains blowing inward with the wind. On the floor beneath it, there were faint, muddy streaks, like someone had climbed in. My voice cracked when I said, "This window was locked. I checked it yesterday." The officer examined it carefully, shining her flashlight along the frame. "There's a tool mark here," she said. "Looks like it was pried open." That's when reality sank in. Someone had broken into my house, and they'd probably been inside for hours, maybe even while I was at dinner. I felt dizzy, gripping the edge of my dresser to keep steady. Marcus spoke softly behind me. "We need to get you out of here." I turned and nodded. The officer agreed, saying they'd stay behind and secure the scene. I quickly grabbed a few things, my phone charger, my laptop bag, my keys, and followed Marcus out. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the sky hadn't finished with us yet. When we got back into the car, I exhaled shakily. Marcus started the engine but didn't drive right away. He looked at me and said, "I've been driving people for years. I've seen some strange things, but I've never had to do that before. Never had to keep someone from going home." His words hit me in a strange way. It made everything feel even more real, like I was part of some story that wasn't supposed to happen to normal people. "Thank you," I said quietly. He gave a small nod. "You did everything right." We started driving toward my mom's house. The roads were nearly empty now, and the glow from the streetlights slid across the windshield in smooth waves. My phone buzzed. "Mom again. checking to make sure I was okay. I told her I was on my way. As we drove, I stared out the window, watching the reflection of the passing lights move across the glass. My house faded into the distance behind us. I thought about the unlocked door, the open window, the footprints, the realization that someone had been there, standing where I slept, filled me with a kind of fear I'd never known before. That night, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to be the quiet, trusting person I had been. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. I didn't know it yet, but the worst wasn't over. The real nightmare was still waiting to be discovered. When we arrived at my mom's house, it was nearly midnight. She was waiting for me on the front porch, wrapped in her robe, her face pale and anxious under the yellow porch light. The second I stepped out of the car, she ran to me and pulled me into her arms. I didn't even try to hold it in anymore. The tears came fast, and I held on to her like I was trying to make up for every second I'd spent feeling safe in that house alone. Marcus waited respectfully by the car, speaking quietly to one of the officers who had followed us back for a statement. My mom led me inside, sat me on the couch, and brought me a blanket even though the room was warm. Her house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, like comfort. For a brief moment, I could almost believe I was safe. While I sat there, replaying every second in my mind, my phone buzzed. It was one of the officers. They had continued searching my home after we left and wanted to give me an update. The tone in his voice was calm, but I could tell he was holding something back. He asked if I could come down to the station in the morning to go over some findings. I agreed, though the word findings sent a cold wave through me. After hanging up, I told my mom what he said. She insisted I try to sleep, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every sound outside made me jump. At around 3 a.m., I sat awake on the couch, staring out the window into the quiet street. I couldn't shake the image of that figure standing at my window, still, watching, waiting. The next morning, Marcus met me and my mom at the police station. He had refused to just drop me off and disappear, saying, "I want to make sure they take this seriously." The officer led us into a small conference room, the walls lined with old posters about safety and community watch programs. He set a folder on the table and sat across from us. "Miss Reynolds," he began, "our team went through your house carefully last night. You were right. Someone had been inside." My mom gasped softly beside me, her hand gripping mine. I just nodded, too numb to respond. He continued, "We found signs that the intruder may have been living there for some time. We discovered food wrappers and bottled water hidden in the basement. There was also a sleeping bag and a few personal belongings." My stomach dropped. "How long?" I managed to ask. The officer hesitated. "It's hard to say, but judging by what we found, probably several weeks." Weeks. I could barely comprehend it. Someone had been inside my home while I worked, cooked, showered, slept. The thought made my skin crawl. He slid a clear evidence bag across the table. Inside was a folded piece of paper. "We also found this taped to the basement wall." I looked at it, my pulse quickening. He unfolded it and read aloud, "You were never really alone." My breath caught. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to stay steady. My mom gasped again, covering her mouth. Marcus leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" the officer asked gently. I shook my head. "No, I don't know anyone around there. I just moved in." He nodded and flipped through a few photos in the folder. "We also found something else. There was a phone charger plugged in behind your bed that doesn't match any devices registered to you. We're sending it for prints. It looks like your intruder was careful, but he left clues." My mom whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. The officer leaned back in his chair. "You're lucky your driver noticed. If you'd gone in alone last night, we might be having a very different conversation." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. The reality of how close I had come to walking right into my own nightmare made me feel faint. Marcus's quiet voice broke through my thoughts. "You did everything right," he said again. When we left the station, the daylight felt strange. Too bright, too normal for what I'd just heard. We drove back to my mom's house in silence. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see someone following us. A few days later, the police called again. They'd identified the man who had been in my house. He was a local drifter, recently released from jail for breaking and entering. They believed he had slipped into my house while it was still for sale and never left, using the spare key I'd forgotten to move. The detective explained that neighbors had occasionally seen lights flicker on in my home during the day when I was gone, but they assumed I was just inside. He had been careful, quiet, and methodical. He'd taken food from my kitchen, used my shower, even charged his phone with my outlets. I could barely listen without shaking. That night, I lay awake again, thinking about every sound I'd ignored in that house. Every creak, every missing snack, every time I'd felt a chill walking down the hallway. It hadn't been in my head. He had been there, breathing the same air, moving through the same rooms. A week later, I returned to the house with an officer to collect the rest of my things. It was daylight, but it still felt haunted. Every corner looked different now. The shadows seemed deeper. My bedroom felt like it belonged to someone else. When I walked into the basement, the air was thick and cold. The police had cleared it out, but I could still see where the sleeping bag had been. The spot on the wall where they found the note was now blank, but I couldn't stop picturing those words. You were never really alone. Standing there, I realized the truth. I hadn't just lost a sense of safety. I'd lost trust in the walls around me. Home wasn't supposed to hide strangers. It was supposed to protect you, and mine had betrayed me. As I left for the last time, Marcus waited by his car. "You're done with that place, right?" he asked. "Completely," I said. "I'm never going back." He nodded, giving me a small, reassuring smile. "Good. You deserve peace." I looked back at the house one last time before getting into the car. It looked harmless, quiet, almost beautiful in the sunlight. But I knew better now. Safety isn't about how things look. It's about what you can't see. And I had seen enough. It's been 3 months since that night, but I still wake up sometimes expecting to hear footsteps that aren't there. My mom says the body heals faster than the mind, and she's right. The bruises from gripping fear fade long before the memories do. I moved out of that house permanently, left most of my furniture behind, and started over in a small apartment near the city. It's on the 3rd floor with neighbors on both sides, lots of light, and nowhere for anyone to hide. I thought distance would erase the fear, but it lingers like a shadow that refuses to let go. For a long time, I couldn't sleep through the night. Every noise made me jump. If a floorboard creaked or a pipe groaned, my heart raced like it was happening all over again. I started keeping a baseball bat by my bed, and I double-checked the locks before closing my eyes. Sometimes I even turned on the TV just to hear another voice in the room. My mom insisted I start therapy, and I finally did. Talking helped more than I expected. I learned that trauma changes how you see the world, that it can make you doubt even the simplest things, like silence or safety. The first few sessions were hard. I cried through most of them. I told my therapist, it wasn't just that someone broke in, it's that I didn't know. He was there while I lived my life. He watched me, probably listened to me talk on the phone, maybe even watched me sleep. Saying those words out loud made it feel real in a way I'd been avoiding. She nodded and said, "It's natural to feel violated, but you survived. You did everything you could, and your instincts saved you." Those words stuck with me. My instincts, and Marcus, had saved me. After everything settled, I stayed in touch with him. We met for coffee a few weeks later, and he told me he'd taken a break from driving nights. After that, he said, I needed a little daylight for a while. We laughed softly about it, but behind the humor, there was shared understanding. That night had changed both of us. The police eventually caught the man who'd been living in my house. He was found a few towns over, squatting in another empty property. When they searched him, they found a small collection of personal items, things that didn't belong to him. Among them was a pair of earrings I hadn't even realized were missing. Just seeing the photo of them in the evidence file made my skin crawl. The idea that he had gone through my things, touched them, and kept them felt worse than the break-in itself. It wasn't just a stranger in my home. It was an invasion of who I was. After that, I became obsessed with security. I bought cameras, motion sensors, and even a smart lock that sends alerts to my phone. My therapist said it's part of regaining control, that safety rituals can help rebuild trust in your environment. Still, no lock feels strong enough when you've learned that fear can walk right through the door. One evening, a few weeks ago, I was driving home from work and noticed an Uber car in front of me. Same make, same model Marcus drove that night. For a second, my chest tightened. Then I realized it didn't scare me anymore. I wasn't the same woman who had gotten into that car months ago. I had learned to listen to my instincts, to pay attention when something felt off. Fear didn't own me anymore. It had simply made me more aware. When I look back now, the scariest part wasn't the moment I saw the figure at my window. It was the time before that, the weeks I'd lived in ignorance, thinking I was alone. That kind of blindness is what keeps danger close. I've learned that awareness is the only real protection we have. Not fear, not denial, but the courage to trust the small voice that says something isn't right. Sometimes I visit my mom on weekends, and she still asks, "Are you sure you're okay?" I smile and tell her I am. And for the most part, it's true. Life has started to feel normal again. I go to work, I cook dinner, I laugh with friends. The difference is, I notice more now. The sound of footsteps outside, the way shadows move at night, the feel of my key turning in the lock. But instead of fear, what I feel now is awareness. I'm alert, not anxious. A few nights ago, I was sitting by my window watching the city lights. For the first time in a long while, I felt peaceful. Then I thought about Marcus again. The moment he whispered, "Act natural," the steady calm in his voice that saved my life. I sent him a message that said, "You were right. Someone was there. Thank you for not letting me walk into that house." He replied a few minutes later, "Always trust your gut, Ava. It's louder than you think." That line stayed with me. Trust your gut. It sounds simple, but it's everything. It's the difference between fear and safety, between ignoring your instincts and surviving because of them. So, if you're listening to this, remember, never ignore that small, uneasy feeling. Lock your doors, stay aware, and never convince yourself that fear is overreacting. It might just be the thing that saves your life. And before you go, if this story kept you watching, make sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us how fragile safety can be. Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening tonight. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's outside your window. It's realizing you were never really alone in the first place.